Thank you very much for joining in again. It's the fifth and last day of the final conference of our S4D4C project, Science Diplomacy for Addressing Global Challenges. I warmly welcome. My name is El-CSID. I have the pleasure to coordinate the S4D4C project. And for the welcome today, I'm joined by the Minister of Science of Spain, Pedro Duque.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to take part in the S4D4C Final networking meeting on science diplomacy. Although we can't gather in person, this virtual event is an excellent opportunity to discuss the vital role of science diplomacy to address global challenges together. As we've all been keenly reminded of over the last year by the pandemic, our society's collective health and well-being is dependent on robust scientific knowledge and our ability to quickly and effectively harness that knowledge by industry to deliver concrete solutions. And it's not only about healthcare, whether it's tackling climate change or harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and supercomputing. Applied scientific knowledge is the key to facing our most pressing challenges. We've also been reminded by COVID-19 that no single country can overcome these kinds of existential challenges alone. Scientific breakthroughs and their applications in the industry are swiftest and most effective when they are the fruit of cross-border collaboration and concerted, well-coordinated international initiatives. That's where science diplomacy comes in. It's crucial that we work together to foster collaboration between scientists, diplomats, policymakers, industry leaders, and other professionals by establishing robust channels for multilateral cooperation. We need to foster flexible, adaptable, and permeable environments for professionals of all kinds to collaborate in addressing global challenges and promoting sustainable development. Spain is strongly committed to international engagement in this area. We have integrated science diplomacy as one of the key priorities in both our new national research and innovation and foreign affairs strategies. We will support the creation and nurturing of a community of science diplomacy stakeholders in Europe and beyond. It's clear, however, that there are still many challenges that we face as we scale up our science diplomacy efforts, including the training of specialized practitioners and their deployment to diplomatic missions around the world. In addition, science diplomacy as a field of study is relatively nascent. Increased research, analysis, and the development of a body of best practices and success stories would be of great benefit for our community as a whole. There's no doubt that science transcends borders. Let's work together to ensure that research advances achieve their full potential.
Thank you to Pedro Duque. So not only a Nobel Prize winner, but also a space scientist have been involved in our event. It was a great honor to have him opening this event. The plenary session today brings together the lessons learned from the European Science Diplomacy Cluster. I am not so sure if all of you in the audience are aware that S4D4C is one out of 3 projects that have been funded by the European Commission in the frame of its Research and Innovation Framework Program, Horizon 2020. In fact, there were 3 of them, and we were also very much encouraged to collaborate, to work together. And I think from the very start of the activities, all of the projects have really made an effort to implement this. And we have created the European Science Diplomacy cluster and also a joint website where we try to bring a bit together what we were doing so far. And I have invited also for our final conference, Luc van Langenhove, who used to be the coordinator of the El-CSID project, and he's now the academic commissioner for international relations and institutes at the Free University Brussels, the VUB in Belgium. And he will look back on a few of the key lessons learned from that project, but also bring in some recommendations for the future and for the legacy of the cluster. The second speaker as well is Pascal Griset. Pascal is the coordinator of the InsSciDE project, and he is the director of the Institute of Science Communication at the Sorbonne University and a professor of modern history. Myself, I'm joining as the S4D4C coordinator based in Vienna at the Center for Social Innovation. The three projects, you see them here, have brought to the cluster different perspectives. So I would say that El-CSID has carefully looked at the interdependencies and interlinkages between science and cultural diplomacy, and science and innovation diplomacy. InsSciDE has had a more historic perspective and brought in, for example, archaeological diplomacy, and looking at the heritage of the know-how that we have from the past in terms of science diplomacy. And our own project has had also a very distinct focus that was on addressing global challenges, so a particular area of science diplomacy. And here you also see the science-diplomacy.eu website that we are indeed also planning to update now with new developments in the next weeks. Each of these projects, represented by the coordinator, of course, stands for a rather large set of stakeholders. We're not going to introduce all of those here now, but I think it's still good to emphasize that there are several institutions that are always coming together for these research projects, and loads of different people that have been involved in the past years in each of them. And I think it has been a very vibrant and diverse multi-stakeholder community, and that is also represented on the slide here. And I have invited the two colleagues to reflect as a start a little bit on highlights from the project implementation. And with this, I would give to Luc as a first speaker. I think you need to still unmute yourself, Luc, then we can hear you.
Here we are, I suppose. Thank you very much for the invitation, Elke. Yes, it's really great to be here and to see that the three projects are still talking to each other and still have ideas about the future. When you ask me what are the highlights from the El-CSID project, well, basically it was a very large project trying to set the scene. And we compared science with cultural diplomacy. And as such, that delivered us more than, I think, about 100 all kinds of academic outputs. So it's very difficult to choose one issue. But if you would ask me what I'm particularly proud of, then I would pinpoint one publication, and vanity will allow me that it's a publication that I wrote. It's a 2016 publication where we proposed with El-CSID to focus science diplomacy on global issues and global challenges. And by all means, I'm not claiming any ownership of the concept, but I think we were one of the many that at the same time approximately try to say, listen guys, we have to turn science diplomacy into the global commons, global challenges issue. And that has been taken up quite well now. It's becoming mainstreamed, not in the least, I think, by all the wonderful work that has been done by the S4D4C colleagues. So I will take the opportunity to congratulate the team for the wonderful work that you all have been doing. Next slide, please. Here we are. the lessons we basically took from the El-CSID project is that, first of all, science diplomacy is, at the moment when we finish the project, and I think it's still the case, needs to better really position itself in the dichotomy between what we call cooperative and competitive science. We have to be indeed very careful that we not, in our enthusiasm of science diplomacy, that we romanticize science. We know that there is a lot of talk about open science, and a lot of good things are happening with open science, opening it up to anybody that is interested to have free access. But we also have to realize that at the same time, there is increasing, let's say, calls for technological sovereignty, which means that also in this respect, the Commission is now announcing that it will rethink its international research collaborations. And we have to take a stance there and see how we can develop science diplomacy in that context. The second thing is that I believe that we have to be realistic, and we have to acknowledge that a lot of scientists, at the end of the day, they couldn't care less about science diplomacy. Scientists are driven by science. They want to do their thing, which is very applaudable. But if somebody comes in and say, hey, will you do something as a science diplomat, or actually what you are doing is science diplomacy, we came across the fact that quite a lot of scientists are not, well, maybe not necessarily negative about it, but that they don't feel any ownership with science diplomacy. And therefore, I think it's very important that we continue to create a kind of academic community of science diplomacy. And thirdly, I would say that one of the big problems that I think for science diplomacy exists is that it not as much is a, let's say, a strategic concept, but a communication label that is used to have some kind of, well, à la limite, public diplomacy, or even you could say marketing aspects. And we need to think about what kind of strategy we want for science diplomacy rather than just use it as a label. Because if we only a label, and if it's only, let's say, if it lacks a little bit the academic anchoring, then the risk is that science diplomacy will undergo the same fate as the concept of technology assessment did some years ago, some decades ago. Remember, technology assessment was a way of bringing in the idea of responsible research in the analysis of the consequences, societal consequences of technology and science for the world. And what happened is that in the beginning, there was some support also from the European Commission, but the member states didn't follow. And at the end of the day, and this is now basically, I think, worldwide, technology assessment is not thriving at all as a practice, nor as an academic endeavor. Next slide, that's the final slide.
I think, look, we come to the recommendation all together.
Okay.
I would now invite Pascal to refer a little bit to his highlights from the project.
Yes, thank you, Elke. Well, first highlight, it was a pleasure to work with so many different people in the TRIP project, and that was maybe for me the main and the first highlight. Then I will add that we were able to confirm the hypothesis of the project. Very often when you write a project, you make promise and you are not sure that you will be able to confirm. The first one was to work in the interdisciplinarity. That was not easy. We, as Elke said, the group was mainly a group of historians, maybe 50%, but the other part was also important of a political science, sociologist, ethnology, archaeologist, and so on. And interdisciplinarity worked well with difficulties. And I have to underline that to work this way means that you have conflict, that you have discussions. And it was in a way funny that in our two first reports, when we were explaining that to the evaluators, we had the feeling that the words that we used, explaining where we are talking, we are exchanging, there are tensions, the feeling was not good with this wording. And what we tried to explain is that these tensions are the ferment and the basis for creativity. The second point is that case studies will first contribute to historical knowledge in a very, I will say, important but classical way. We will publish in journals and so on. And then in a kind of two steps flow, we will elaborate shorter text that will be used to train and to promote exchanges between the actors of science diplomacy. And this organization is not so easy to manage, and it worked well. And we are now able to say that we are producing very good history, and that this history will be implemented in a present time process really efficient. Third, highlight the constant crossing between the research process and the stakeholder inputs. We were able to avoid a sequential system, listening the question of the stakeholders and then work. We were able to have a constant exchange through different process, of course, with scientists, with diplomats, and that was very important for us. And last highlight for today, we were, and I was personally really thinking that to use the word training was not always very well connected to the reality of these communities. And we decided to use the word acculturation between the scientists, the diplomats, different stakeholders, in order to imagine some ways of exchange that could be efficient in order to do research and to produce efficient knowledge for the future. Considering the lessons, I don't know if you want me to go through the lessons right now, Elke?
I don't know if you want to do your pitch about attending the summer school.
Okay, well, we organized last year our first summer school. This summer school was a real success, organized in this transition between real life and Zoom life. And the next one will be in June. And the application is open until the end of March. We have already a lot of people who are asking information, and I think that they will apply to join us. We organized that with our the main institutions which are on the screen, mostly EAD in Warsaw, and we hope that we will be able to improve again the way we were able to have acculturation between different kind of actors, but also between generations. And that is, of course, I'm a professor, something that is very important for us. So join Warsaw Science Diplomacy School, the second edition in June.
Great. And I think it's super timely. I mean, it's everyone who is listening here, you get all the warm recommendations for this summer school. So you should have loads of applications to choose from. I want to compliment from the side of S4D4C a few highlights, but of course, I don't want to repeat what has been said over the whole week. And I also, but then now I do repeat that the approach to form clusters with similar projects, definitively, I think it was a highlight for me too. And I can recommend that really strongly. The Madrid Declaration has very often been mentioned as well. And for me, it was the first time that I saw something like a declaration being developed in a Horizon project. And I think it was also due to some of this diplomacy touch that our partners brought in. And I thought it was an amazing thing. So to me, that's also in the first year, having this kind of declaration out where individuals could sign up. And it was a very, very good approach to stakeholders. That we were in the discussion, we were quoted. I think that was a really good, smart move of our colleagues in Madrid after they organized the conference. So I learned something very important there. The open online course and the feedback received, that's for me the emotional highlight, I would say. So meeting the course, the trainees that took our open online course, and hearing that it was really useful for them is basically one of the big things that keeps me going. And I think I can speak also for several of the partners. It was very, very beneficial for the heart. And instrumental, from the instruments that we used, I think I want to highlight to have had the agreement. Could you please mute everyone, Madalena? Thank you so much. I almost got a heart attack. I was just referring to the open source material. We had an agreement that all our training materials and what is being produced based on taxpayers' money in the Horizon 2020 project needs to be open source, openly available, and CC BY. If you don't know what that is, I think also the colleagues can provide you with information about that. It means basically that everyone is allowed to reuse our slides, our infographics, our whatever work you come across on our website, apart from obviously the scientific publications that are open source as well. It's the training materials, it's some knowledge resources that we have provided, a commented bibliography, and so on. And CC BY also means that you can even use those things for commercial purposes. And there we had the discussion that if a social scientific research project can produce something that people can use to generate money from, how amazing is that? And we would just be very, very proud of everyone who uses our open source materials and our toolkit in which we place all this into context and so on. So I think that's also part of my highlights. We then have already heard major lessons learned from the El-CSID project. Luc covered his major points in the previous intervention. So I would now here hand to Pascal and let us know some kind of preliminary lessons that you would like to highlight from the InsSciDE project. You still have a year to go, so much more time than we have with 1 month to go, but I'm sure you already have something to share.
Sure. As an historian, I don't like too much the word lessons. History doesn't give lessons, but can help to think about the present time and future. And I will underline 2 points, 2 main points. The first one is that crossing the information and concept coming from the historical case studies and the exchange with political scientists and mostly stakeholders of present time, we think that it's difficult to cut what is called technical diplomacy, diplomacy through technology, economic diplomacy, and science diplomacy. We think that there is a kind of triangle that I will connect to the concept of innovation diplomacy that is mostly used for maybe 3 or 4 years. I am for a long time an historian of innovation, and I think that this concept of innovation connected to diplomacy covers very well the reality of the diplomat's activities. And I was amazed by the fact that many science diplomats told us, well, of course, I have to defend ideas, concepts, and so on, but I have also to help the companies of my country to sell things, to sign contracts, and so on. And through the concept of technoscience, we see that it's no more possible to think about science without thinking about technology. The two spheres are completely linked, completely connected. So that's why we will propose in the future this global concept of innovation diplomacy as a real tool. And the second point will be to confirm one of our hypotheses. That's why we wrote a shared science diplomacy for Europe. We do not believe that it will be possible in a close future to have a European science diplomacy as a whole, with an administration, with diplomats and so on, working all together. We believe that the cooperation between the different states, the different stakeholders, not only the states, will be able to create a European science diplomacy. And doing that means that some priorities and targets will be, you will need to identify priorities and targets in order to focus a common action of European actors, European stakeholders, European diplomats for very precise objective, very precise target, and that will be efficient. It's possible to find consensus and to work together, not for everything, but if we are able, if Europe is able to identify these points and to work together, that will work.
Thank you, Pascal. Let me add a few lessons learned from the S4D4C project, but be very brief because you have heard from our side for a whole week. And one of the key lessons that I just wanted to have said, because it is also a bit important for my values, is that science diplomacy for addressing global challenges, as we have analyzed it, is on the balance between openness and protection of the EU strategic autonomy, clearly an argument to cooperate, to encourage and increase openness. So even if the ambivalence of the concept, which includes the national interest approach, as well as the approach to strengthen the global commons, and even if this ambivalence is often remaining in the dark in the operational work of science diplomats, we want to emphasize that there is always the science diplomacy for addressing global challenges argument to be open, and that implicitness also might play a very important role. We have analyzed that, and that effective science diplomacy is not always explicitly named as such. The contexts are complex and variable, and our colleagues at the University of Twente have provided a very, very thoroughly worked out new protocol for science diplomacy. And with that, we want to say that we should rather focus on the general enabling conditions, on the principles and processes that should guide science diplomacy, rather than prescribing the content or the actors or specific interests. And as a last point, I think I want to make that although we have published now, for example, Lorenzo Melchor's publication or Magagual, there is now better understanding of what a science diplomat is, but the concrete professional profiles are obviously still rare. So capacity building and training, or the acculturation, as you framed it, Pascal, are still high in demand, especially from the academic sector around the world. But we need to be very careful in framing those, and at the same time also developing these professional profiles. And there we come already to recommendations. I think my highlights and lessons learned were already going into the direction of recommendations. And here I would like to ask Luc to come in again and share some of his key recommendations from his project.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologies for the mobile, because yes, it was me. Anyway, the El-CSID project is already by now 2 years old. So the recommendations we made at that time are a little bit dated. So the thing that I want to do now is say something about what I take as this moment, what I see as at this very moment as a kind of general way that science diplomacy could go to. And basically what I'm thinking of is that we should think about the possibility to expand science diplomacy with a fourth dimension. We all know the AAAS, Royal Society taxonomy, science for diplomacy, diplomacy for science, science in diplomacy. But I think we also need the fourth element, that is diplomacy in science. And by that, I mean that we need the use of diplomatic skills and tools for defending and advancing global scientific knowledge. If you want, you can also call it, instead of science in diplomacy, you can call it scientific knowledge diplomacy, because I believe strongly that there are very good reasons why science should have, let's say, mobilized diplomatic skills and diplomatic actions for defending its own position. And I see several reasons. One of them is to the combat of anti-scientism, which is growing. We have to think about fragmentation, because the interesting thing is that the more science is specialized, the more we need a kind of discussion or dialogue between the specialists and the non-specialists. And the field of non-specialization is getting always grow greater and greater. There is also the issue that we have to use diplomatic instruments to make sure that we can raise the non-academic impact on societal debates. And it also includes the professionalization of dialogue with policymakers. The ICCP is a very good example of how complex it is, but also how efficient it can be organized. And maybe we have to think about science diplomacy as a more generic way of bringing results to policymakers and to society. So that's why I claim that we need to think about adding diplomacy in science, or knowledge diplomacy, to the definition of the taxonomy advanced by AAAS. And I'm happy, of course, to debate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a very good paper proposal coming out. What is the diplomacy in science? Pascal, how would you like to complement this, or bring in your own recommendations?
Well, in order to make recommendation, I decided to take some fresh air, because it's I moved to the outside of my university in order to consider what we could give as strong recommendations. It's always difficult as when you are an academic to say to people who are actually in charge of things what they could do. So we have to be careful. The first point is that I will remind that, as you say, Elke, our project is still working, and that we will have two more open conferences, one in Erlangen in Germany at the end of this year, and another one in Lisbon at the end of January or beginning of February next year. And as an extra, we will organize, that was not in the first program, but with the crisis, we decided to extend the project and to develop some things. We will have a final conference in Paris in June 2022, and we will continue the work of the Alliance on this basis of these conferences, of course. So 3 points are on the slide. The first one, I will say that I know, I'm aware that the concept of science diplomacy, and mostly the practitioners of science diplomacy, and overall the academics are thinking, and they are right, and we are right to think that science diplomacy has to change something in diplomacy, bringing new ideas, bringing a kind of ideal of a new future. Science diplomacy is doing diplomacy in another way, with other concepts, in a more modern perspective. It's true, but when you have to deal with present time diplomats, you have to accept that science diplomacy is a part of present time diplomacy, and has to integrate the challenges related to power relations. That's why in our project we exchange a lot, and it's a part of our project with a political scientist, mostly about this concept of power. You cannot cut, even if it's shocking in a way, the science and power. Science is universal, but science is also linked to nations and to some kind of progress. So we can try to fight against that and to promote some more idealistic perspective, but we have to be aware of that. The second point is that we try to connect our work to the reality of what are European institutions at present time. And I have to admit very frankly that at the very beginning of the project, I have to learn a lot of things about how was working people in Brussels, not only the organization, but also their culture. And I have now another look at my own country. I thought that in France, it was very common to have conflict between different administration and between different ministries, between different people and so on. And I thought that it was different in other places. But we have to admit that to have all people in Brussels going in the same way about science diplomacy would be a good thing. And it's not always the case at present time. So one of our recommendations would be to reinforce the External Action Service. They are trying to work very well. They are doing a very good job in the main capital city in the world. But I think that the interface between this External Action Service and the different DGs has to be improved. And that connected to the fact that we recommend the identification of precise targets, this process and the tools to address the challenges have to be co-constructed between a stronger External Action Service and the different DGs. For instance, about health diplomacy or about the other global challenge. It's very important. This common understanding is a key point for future success. And my last point will be the fact that the SD strategy will have to be connected to a coherent action of the EU. What I mean through that is that it's impossible to have contradiction between the way you address science in the European Union and the way you address the question of science diplomacy outside the European Union. The question of vaccine, for instance, at present time, it's a demonstration of that. This coherence is very important. And I will say, above all, these actions will have to meet the expectation of European citizens. If we want to have a European science diplomacy, we will need to have European citizens knowing that this diplomacy is efficient and is in a way protecting them, will help them to feel better in the world and to have a better life in a way. And I will add just a few words after these 3 points, is that the transversality between these 3 points is communication. I agree completely with Luc saying that science diplomacy is not only communication, but if you want to have a good and efficient science diplomacy, or as we say, innovation diplomacy, you have to communicate and communicate smartly.
Yeah, I hope we do that. It's upon the audience to judge. I think that from the side of S4D4C, we can complement most of the issues that you raised, and that strengthening the institutions that there are, but the point that I wanted to make here is also to strengthen the interaction spaces and the boundary organizations between those, and to form kind of structured interfaces. One of the suggestions that I thought to bring in, because I think it has not yet been discussed in the conference, would be that it needs something like a science diplomacy booster also for projects like ours, but also for projects in nanotechnology or quantum or climate change, obviously, so that they could have an interaction point that explores together with them the foreign policy impacts of their work. So I think as a coordinator of a project, that could actually be a very beneficial service. Like I'm also having a service helping me to structure my IPR. Similar, we could structure foreign policy impacts and science diplomacy impacts together with projects. Obviously, we call for more capacity building on the topic, including research-based training and including the co-creation with all the many stakeholders, and also the point that has been made multiple times of the evaluation to see what is just the talk and the communication and what is the action actually. Recommendations are available in our policy paper, so I'm not going to go into all of those. I want to highlight one that we have just published very, very recently. It's about nurturing the EU science diplomacy community, the launch for EU Science Diplomacy Alliance for addressing global challenges. This paper that has been developed by our colleagues in Spain has set out from mapping different stakeholders, stakeholder types. Are they research organizations, civil society, governmental organization, international organizations, etc., but also on, are they working on a subnational, on a national, on a sub-global or global level? And then they have mapped also their challenges and the interests that they have. They've been looking at already existing science diplomacy networks, and then they have come to the conclusion that in order to bring all these things together for Europe, because they also looked at international examples, so you would see here one example, only the box that I copied here on the slide, that showcases diaspora networks, but they have developed quite an interesting set of stakeholders with fact sheets about them. So it's a source for you to get informed about who is around there. And at the end, it's the recommendation of the launch of a European Union Science Diplomacy Alliance to address global and societal challenges. And in the course of the preparation of all this and our end of the project, the EU Science Diplomacy Cluster has come together and has discussed if we can transition in a way and improve and upgrade from the nucleus that we have here with the three projects to such an EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. Yeah, that would be kind of like the idea. It's a bit of a soft launch that we're having here today, a bit of an announcement also. So we have agreed on a few objectives for this alliance, that we want to work again together on projects if that comes around in variable geometry, but we want to support information exchange, awareness raising, training, the education, institutional building, capacity building, all the things that we have done in the project, and we want to continue doing. Our project ends, Luke's project has ended 2 years ago. We were looking for a sustainable vehicle to do that, to promote and create knowledge exchange and in these interaction interfaces that I was talking about before. So we also want to keep track a little bit and have a forum of exchange of like, oh, what's going on here and in this country and in that country, and provide advice to science diplomacy stakeholders. How do we want to do that? I will give just a few bullet points as well. We are, of course, still in this forming phase. So it's kind of like forming forming, norming, storming, performing. So we're still in the forming phase, but we have decided that it should be an alliance of legal entities. So it's not individuals, it's organizations. And it's organizations who self-commit something. So we want to mobilize our own resources, things that we're doing anyways, and support each other in the achievement of the joint objectives. The nucleus is based on the 3 EU-funded projects, but also if our colleagues are changing organization, then we are obviously happy to take on board new organizations. We have done that already, and also it should be open for new members. We want to meet twice a year. So we're looking at the first inaugural meeting in June, and there should be like a rotating co-chair system that every 6 months organizes these kind of meetings. And in order to streamline a little bit already the decision making, we thought of the 3 chairs that are coming in a row would be acting as a kind of trio to develop a bit of a more long-term work plan and hand over nicely also the contacts and the issues that are being discussed in the alliance. We have established an email address that should be also rolling and moving on between the chairs, so that you would always be able to reach the alliance via one email address. And costs of everything would have to be covered by the institutions themselves with voluntary contributions, and maybe also the projects that we might apply together. We have assembled a first set of kind of founding members that you see here, and they are indeed coming from all the 3 projects and their individual, like the organizations of the members of the 3 projects. What are the opportunities for our audience here? So we will update the website that I have mentioned before, which used to be the cluster website. That will be the website of the Alliance. So this will be done also in the next weeks until April, May. And it will be an information point for you there. You can always get in touch if you're interested what we're doing via the email that I mentioned. And organizations, and again, I want to say this is an organizational commitment. So from the European Union, if you're a legal entity representing a legal entity and you want to join the network, get in touch. We think that any joining member needs to agree to the objectives and what we have been writing then so far, commit to some of the related activities, and have some own commitments and resources that would be the basis of this kind of like this self-commitments. And we plan to review the kind of applications and nominations at every meeting. So at every half year, we will be looking at who was interested in joining, and the respective chairs will manage that process. And as I said, it's still very early in our development. So maybe we will not be able yet to answer all the questions, but I think this is a very good start and initial announcement that we're having here. As I was talking about the prospective chairs and the initial periods, I would like to call upon them briefly. So from the launch of the initiative, which is probably today, to the first half year, 30th of June, Center for Social Innovation, my organization, is having the chairmanship, and my colleague and head of unit research policy and development, Gorazd Weiss, will briefly confirm.
Yes, thank you, Elke, very much. First of all, I would like to thank the whole S4D4C consortium, and especially you, Elke, and your team for the implementation of S4D4C project. I would like to confirm that we at ZSI are very committed and looking forward to continue our cooperation in science diplomacy in the frame of the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, and in this way not only to ensure the sustainability of the project results, but we are also looking forward to continue the further research cooperation with all the members of the Alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guarast. That was a very brief commitment from our side. So I think Center for Social Innovation was very proud of the S4D4C project, and we will be very proud of the Alliance. Thank you, Guarast. Angela, you have, with the partner DLR, decided that you would be available to chair for the second half of 2021. What were your ideas on that?
Yes, we are very excited about being part of the launch of this new alliance, actually the Brussels office of the DLR Project Management Agency will be the chair, which actually means that I, being the head of the Brussels office, will be looking at what we can do with our with being based in Brussels. We are looking at organizing several events in the fall, of course, events that we must yet discuss with our colleagues. And before I do forget, I will be supported by Stella Vrashka in all of the activities that we will be looking at from Brussels, who has been a very active member in S4D4C. So we have somebody who's been part of the project in this chairmanship, because I unfortunately was not able to participate in this project. But we are looking at events that will facilitate knowledge exchange and outreach activities, but also trying to look at finding dialogue with new and old science diplomacy activists, of course, not only located in Brussels, but with a look at what's going on in Brussels. So we would love to extend the invitation to get in touch with us. We're looking forward to a very active and intense, constructive exchange with all of the partners and with new partners. Yeah, please be in touch.
Thank you. Yes, we can only support that call. Claire Mays is a representative of the InsSciDE consortium, and she and her colleague have agreed to take over a chairmanship role in the first half of 2022. Claire, can we meet you and discuss with you the progress of the community?
Yes, thank you very much, Elke. Thanks to everyone. I'm very happy and proud to be here. I want to go back a few years and think about the birth of the InsSciDE project. And it was also the birth, if you will, of the relationships that we were able to form with the cluster projects, and through all of these networking meetings with a huge and growing community of enthusiastic science diplomacy practitioners and researchers. It was almost all of 5 years ago that Pascal Griset sponsored 2 open colloquia to bring together people to explore the idea of creating a project in response to the European Commission H2020 call that we were eventually enabled to win by our joint efforts. It was a very, very open process, this colloquium. We spent a total, I think, of 3 or 4 days in 2 different colloquia to gather, to explore, to try to develop an idea of, how could we create work and understanding and action together in this field of science diplomacy for Europe. And out of those very open-ended meetings came a successful project design, and we had the great pleasure and stimulation of joining with the other projects when the cluster itself was formed to continue these complementary open discovery processes. And we've proved in the time that we've been working in this EU science diplomacy cluster of the H2020 projects, we've proved that we are indeed capable of interdisciplinary work and of mutual acculturation, as the colleagues Luc and Elke and Pascal described in such a evocative way, describing the processes of our research and the dynamic recommendations, I would say, that came out of these processes of research. So now, with this idea of an alliance, it's because we're eager to continue integrating the knowledge. We're eager to follow up on these wonderful affinities that have been discovered. We're eager to continue to provide a space for capacity building, for this acculturation, to support now stakeholders of different types across Europe in their missions, whether those missions be education, reflection, research, strategy and policy, or addressing directly global challenges with science diplomacy. And so we are ready, all of the founding members, and we know many more members in the coming months, we're ready to carry out our self-commitments of the activities that we propose. And I just would end by saying that there's been a particular eye-opener for me, as always happens in the S4D4C networking meetings, an eye-opener to see the multiple dimensions of work, initiatives, reflection, practice coming from all over the world. And of course, we know that our Europe is part of this world, and we're so eager to continue this mutual integration. And so Paris, June 2022, InsSciDE and the Alliance will be very, very honored and happy to welcome as many of you as can come to Paris, or through an online dimension as well, to the Alliance conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire, for carrying us until June 2022. The baton would then go over to Spain and Izaskun Lacunza.
Hey, hi, Elke. Good afternoon, everybody. So FECID has worked in, as many of the rest of the partners have worked in very many different European projects over the years. But I need to say that the S4D4C project has been especially special, touching, vibrant, and it is an honor for us to participate in the Alliance. For many months already, we had the feeling that we couldn't just disappear when the three projects finished, because of the great collaboration that we have achieved among partners, but also because we owe it to the community somehow. I mean, we have had so many connections with people from all over the world, collaborations with so many institutions that we couldn't just disappear. So it will be an honor to participate in the Alliance, and the only thing I can say is long life to the Alliance and to all of us. Thank you, Elke.
Thank you so much. We have already defined the first half of 2023, and then we are going to be open and we're going to develop the newcomers to take over the chairmanship. But in 2023, Luc and the El-CSID project that will then have been quite long ago will take over. Luc, do you have something to add to the 2023 plans?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for inviting me to take over the baton in 23. That's still a long way to go, but we're ready for it. Basically, what you will see on the screen now is the strange acronym GUNTD, GUNT or something like that. And I need some explanation for that. Basically, in El-CSID project, we had two Belgian partners. There was the Institute of European Studies at VUB on the one hand, and United Nations University in Bruges on the other hand. In both centers, we developed some expertise on science and cultural diplomacy. And at this moment, we have created a new structure, the Brussels School of Governance in Brussels, that is collaborating quite strongly with you and you, Chris. And the two entities, the deans of the two entities decided to join, to strengthen each other and to create a research unit on non-traditional diplomacy that will focus upon science diplomacy, but also cultural diplomacy and other forms of public diplomacy. So I'm very happy to announce today that next to the international network, we also have a Belgian network, which is of course also in essence international, on science diplomacy, for which we're still looking for the right name, but for the time being, we call it non-traditional diplomacy. But I'm sure by 2023, you will have heard a lot more about this new initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are concluding this session at 2:05. We start with the next one, and we will have you, dear audience, approximately 100 people in the audience, to help us with a little poll. As you have seen, we're not yet completely sure. This is all in the forming phase. We're working on a poll that will be launched to all of you to help us selecting the appropriate logo. We have 2 drafts kindly being developed also based on self-commitments, because yeah, there is not yet or not in the plan to have some financing here. I'm not sure if you already see the poll. Madalena, yes, there it is. What logo do you prefer, A or B? And we can have this online for the next minute, because I'm already a little bit over time. We should be finishing, to give you a little bit of possibility to have a health break as well between the two sessions, so that you're ready to join the high-level dialogue that our colleague Lorenzo Melchor is moderating at 2:05. And I'm just smiling because I'm reading the football comments in the chat, but I would say we call it a day for this session. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the prospective chairs. If you're interested, get in touch. As I mentioned, we are here to develop that and co-create this alliance. So there's a warm invitation to be in touch with us. Thank you very much. And shall we still show the results of this first poll? Narrowly, logo number B. So I think we're going to play football and not rugby or whatever that is. Thank you very much and goodbye. See you at 2:05 for the next session. Bye-bye.